Contrary to the market sentiment in crypto right now, Sei is having its own run. Mindshare is exploding, TVL is at an all-time high, volumes at an all-time high, and overall, the interest in Sei is just growing and exploding. And I'm very proud to have with me today Jay, the co-founder of Sei Labs. And Jay has been a guest on my show in December of 2022, long before the Sei mainnet even launched. Also, for full disclosure, I am an investor into SEI Network, and we're also running a validator with Stakecito on Sei. And now, please enjoy this conversation with Jay, co-founder of Sei Labs. Round two with Jay, co-founder of Sei Labs. There's a lot, especially in recent days, a lot of news around SEI Network. It seems like Sei summer is here, so we're gonna learn all about that today. Jay, thanks a lot for being back on the channel. How's it going? How are you?
Bro, life is good. Thank you for having me on again, man.
Yeah, appreciate you joining. And I think there's a lot to cover. I think mainly, obviously, this is a Cosmos-centric YouTube channel. And the last interview we did in December of 2022, we actually talked a lot about Cosmos, about IBC, about interoperability, sovereignty, and all those kind of aspects. And I think now there's a lot of changes coming for Sei. The biggest one is probably the upcoming Giga upgrade, which is also going to replace the Sei consensus algorithm, which is currently Tendermint or Comet BFT. So can you maybe share broadly kind of your insights on what Giga brings to the table, what it means for Sei? And then maybe in that context, we can also chat a bit more about your relationship with Cosmos and plans there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess maybe taking a step back, we're trying to build a decentralized Wall Street. And when we got started initially, I think last time we chatted, our architecture was very much a Cosmos app chain type of architecture back in 2022, where we were trying to build something where, I mean, honestly, kind of similar to Hyperliquid would be the closest example, where there's a native order book, and then there's applications that are building on top. The applications that would be built on top back then were being built using CosmWasm. And CosmWasm, as it turns out, does not have a very large developer ecosystem compared to the EVM. So we went live in August of 2023 with Sei version 1. And initially there was a ton of buzz, like everyone was super excited. And then around 2 weeks after the launch, all of that excitement died down. And it was really difficult to get developers to come and build in the ecosystem because most developers right now are EVM developers. I think the most recent Electric Capital report was that around 80% of developers are EVM devs, which when you think about it, is kind of insane because Solana has captured so much market share and move chains like Sui have also captured a good amount of market share, but most developers are still EVM developers. And if you look at Solana developers, most of them are just largely deploying the same 6 sets of smart contracts. So there's not as much innovation happening from that side relative to what's happening on the EVM. So with that being said, we realized, okay, we don't have a big developer ecosystem right now. Most crypto developers are using the EVM. We need to be supporting the EVM. This then led to us looking into what we can improve about the EVM. And the clearest thing for us to improve was performance. If you look at the EVM right now, any EVM-based chain, you notice that, first of all, there's a very small number of transactions that can be supported. Ethereum L1 is less than 100 transactions per second. Rollups are less than a couple hundred transactions per second. And the result of that is that you end up having very high gas fees. On Ethereum L1, it can cost dozens, if not hundreds of dollars to just initiate really simple transactions. And it can also result in a very restricted design space for developers. And that's something that a lot of people don't really think about. If you can only support like 200 transactions per second, let's say, as a developer, you have to build really restricted applications in order to get something that fits those requirements. And that leads to things such as automated market makers getting built. In traditional finance, you largely don't see automated market makers at all because they're less capital efficient and they're a worse design. But within these limitations of what the EVM currently offers, that's the only thing that really works, which is why AMMs have taken off much more than order book based exchanges have. So we decided to focus on scaling the EVM. And this basically resulted in the Sei V2 approach, which was parallelizing the EVM. And this let us get the best of both Ethereum and Solana. We were able to get the developers, the tooling, the mindshare that came with the EVM, while also getting the performance that you see with chains like Solana. So we went live with Sei V2 in July of 2024. So around a year ago from the time of this recording. That was a fantastic launch. Like compared to the V1 launch, I think the amount of traction that we started seeing in the ecosystem from that was just magnitudes higher. And I think that kind of represents just how strong the excitement around the EVM is. So we started seeing a ton of organic activity start to happen. And the question for us became, okay, well, what's next? So we kind of went back to our roots, building a decentralized Wall Street. And we thought to ourselves, what is the next big milestone in terms of the infrastructure that we want to be supporting there? And the simple answer there is we want to be able to support all trading activity. So if you look at NASDAQ currently needs 20,000 transactions per second, and NASDAQ represents around 10% of global securities trading. So if we want to support all securities trading worldwide, we need to get up to 200,000 transactions per second. There is no EVM-based chain out there that is even remotely close to something like that. And just for comparison, 200,000 TPS is equivalent to around 5 gigagas per second. That's the traditional metrics that EVM folks use to measure compute. OPBNB and SEI are currently the highest in terms of gas per second, and they're both at around 100 megagas per second. There is no chain right now that is even remotely close to 5 gigagas. If you look at chains on testnet, the ones that are most hyped up right now, Monad is getting around 300 megagas per second, and the latest I heard from MegaETH was around 1.6 gigagas. So no one is really close to 5 gigagas. This then led to us thinking, okay, we want to be supporting 5 gigagas. How do we do that? Well, the current architecture we had with V2 was completely built using the Cosmos stack. It was built using Cosmos SDK. We were using Tendermint as well for the base of our consensus mechanism. And we quickly realized that there are limitations in terms of performance for how much you can scale with Cosmos. So then we went back to the drawing board. We're like, okay, let's say that we want to build everything from scratch. How do we approach this? And this then led to us looking at our existing architecture. We benchmarked every single part of the system, and we understood where the bottlenecks are. The clearest bottleneck for us was data propagation, like literally sending data between different validators in the network. And as it turns out, when you have a single proposer architecture, which is what we currently have, where there's one block producer that has to send the block to everyone else, that single block producer is a bottleneck. Like that block producer is what slows down the entire system. And because of that, we realized a multi-proposer architecture where every single validator in the network is able to propose their own blocks will allow us to get much better data propagation because that single block producer is no longer the bottleneck. And I think that was the biggest unlock for us. We started looking into academic research around, okay, how can we support a multi-proposer architecture? And this led to us discovering Autobahn. So this was researchers from UC Berkeley and Cornell. Around September, October of last year is when they released this paper. And our head of research joined around the same time. He's like, guys, we have to start using this. And that was kind of the journey around using Autobahn. So at this point, we're in touch with that team and we're like actively working on the next version of Autobahn with them. And yeah, we decided to start using Autobahn, multi-concurrent producers. We also decided to benchmark other parts of the system. We realized that execution is another bottleneck, just being able to literally execute the transactions that are coming in and update the state. So we started building an entirely new client from scratch as well. And the approach that we took, like with the Cosmos SDK, there's a lot of tech debt that we'd have to completely, basically have to work around. So instead of doing that, we decided to just build an entirely new EVM client from scratch that is EVM only. And the last thing that we did is Merkleization, which is generating the state root, is a really expensive process. So instead of doing that, we decided that we would have async state commitment generation. And without going too deep in the weeds over there, it's basically just a much faster way to get that state commitment. So all of these changes are part of Sei Giga, which is going to be the big push that we have to be able to support all trading activity on Sei in the future.
Yeah, I don't have a depth of technical understanding, but it definitely, and I appreciate also you kind of breaking it down in also simpler terms, because what you described definitely makes sense. And I also believe, even though I'm not technical or a developer, but I think there's definitely bottlenecks and limitations in Cosmos. And I think also curious to hear your thoughts, but being deep in Cosmos myself, I think there's also been a lot of structural kind of misalignments that probably led to some of the, situations that we're now in with, for example, you guys depreciating support for CosmWasm. And I think CosmWasm, generally speaking, is, as you said, has not really gained substantial market shares. But yeah, I'm just curious, generally speaking, besides kind of the technical stuff, where do you see Cosmos over the past 2 years, Sei being a Cosmos chain until now at least, the community, the vibes, the kind of leadership, the sentiment, what has your experience been in Cosmos?
Yeah, so I wouldn't really say Sei has been a true Cosmos chain even for the past 2-3 years. With that being said, my commentary on the Cosmos side would be that it has a fantastic set of developers. There's so much research and kind of cutting edge exploration happening. And I just think that the ability to commercialize that has been what the Cosmos ecosystem has struggled with. I can't really talk about why that is. My best guess is that it is just extremely, extremely decentralized. And when you have something that's that decentralized, it's difficult to move quickly and have a single unified vision. That's something that we're seeing with Ethereum as well. Like, it kind of feels like Cosmos does stuff first, then Ethereum does stuff, and then the rest of the world kind of realizes those are the things to do. And I think, Ethereum is struggling with something similar, where there's just so many people with competing points of view. It's hard to have a singular direction. Even with like the most recent kind of direction setting that they've done from the Ethereum side, where their first priority is to scale the L1, second priority is to support scaling L2s. It feels like those are kind of contradictory with each other. Like, if you're scaling the L1, you probably wouldn't need to be supporting L2s or like scaling L2s. So I think it's really tough. Like, once you become that decentralized, it's difficult to really be able to move forward. So I think that would be probably the biggest reason why. And that's led me to kind of build a mental framework that you only want that level of decentralization, like Bitcoin, Cosmos, Ethereum level of decentralization, once a project has achieved product market fit. If you haven't achieved product market fit yet, and I'd argue that only Bitcoin out of the three projects I mentioned has achieved, or out of the three ecosystems I've mentioned, has achieved product market fit. But if you haven't achieved product market fit, you do need to have at least one singular vision that is guiding everyone. And if that's not there, it's really difficult to move quickly. And I think that's one thing that Toli and the Solana ecosystem have done very well. There still is that one unified vision of IBRL, increase bandwidth, reduce latency, that has been guiding all the technical development from their side.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one. Also, I think the whole kind of vision about also attracting developers, kind of shaping the narrative, building communities at a global scale. If you look at Super Team, what they've been building is absolutely amazing. And I think Cosmos as an ecosystem has a lot to learn from that. And I'm doing my best to kind of execute some of these ideas. But as you mentioned, I think Cosmos has always been a very bottom-up ecosystem with no unified vision besides, the fact that Cosmos is all about sovereignty, interoperability, IBC. But I think now, I'm not sure if you followed any of that, but with this acquisition of Skip Protocol, now ICL, Interchain Labs, that for the first time at least, we have well-respected, young, ambitious guys running the main foundation in Cosmos, or the main operational arm of the foundation, that is trying to actually implement some of those things and also act as true leaders. I think that's really been missing in Cosmos, and we'll see where that goes. But
okay, I mean, my last thoughts over there. First of all, I think that's a fantastic team to come and take over like leadership for them from the Cosmos side. So I'm excited to see where that plays out. I haven't really been following it too closely, like more broadly the Cosmos ecosystem, since late 22, early 23. But I do think that there's a lot of potential over here. And if there is some kind of like unified vision that is able to guide everyone, there is a chance for Cosmos to like really, really, just kind of hit it out of the park in terms of the success of the ecosystem.
At one point, we're going to do Cosmoverse Medellin 2.0, and I hope you're going to be there, because you were there in the last one. I think that was your first.
And that was my first time honestly, that was my first time in South America entirely. And that was just a fantastic experience.
Yeah, and I think also it was, in hindsight, also the most legendary and also productive conference, because we had you guys, we had Babylon, we had Stride, Skip Protocol itself that kind of came out of stealth back then. So a lot of like multi-billion-dollar chains that were launching a couple years after that. But yeah, we'll get those vibes back in Cosmos at some point, and get back to Medellin as well, which is a great place. And generally speaking, I think also like regions like South America and Balkans and all these kind of regions, they also need a lot more events and attention to be onboarded into crypto. But anyways, I think so. We covered Giga that is coming, replacing the consensus with Autobahn. I'm also curious because Solana announced also this new consensus called Alpenglow. What are your thoughts on that? Is that something that you're also looking at, or what are your thoughts?
It's kind of our job to be at least aware of what's happening from the industry side. I think it's an interesting consensus mechanism. I think the move towards having higher or like a lower number of Byzantine validators that are supported in exchange for having less rounds of voting, that is kind of, well, I was going to say it's kind of a no-brainer, but I think there's definitely trade-offs that come with that. Like with Alpenglow, you need more validators to come to consensus, but then it allows you to have less rounds of voting. Like you can just have one round of voting. I think that the benefit of that is that if the validators are relatively close together, then getting that 80% doesn't take as much time. So you're able to have consensus more quickly. But the downside there is if the validators are really, really spread apart, then that extra 14%, like I forget the exact numbers, I think it's 80% that Alpenglow needs. So that difference between 66% and 80%, that 14% difference, can actually take more time than just having a second round of consensus, second round of voting happening. So I don't know the exact thresholds, and I don't really know the exact network topology of Solana, but I think at least intellectually it is very interesting. And I do think that having some kind of consensus mechanism like Alpenglow sets the groundwork, lays the base layer for them to start moving towards a multi-concurrent producer approach as well. And I know that they're one of the teams that's been doing a lot of really interesting work over there. Like we're chatting pretty closely with Max Resnick from the Anza side. And I'm excited to see them kind of moving in the same direction of just realizing that MCP is the future. It's better from a performance standpoint, and it's also better from a censorship resistance standpoint to build better trading systems.
What are the plans for Sei with IBC? Because I think a couple of months ago I did a video how Sei was dethroning Osmosis as the kind of IBC hub when it comes to transfers and volumes and activity. And I also believe there's very strong economic activities between Noble, which is the native asset issuance chain in Cosmos, and Sei for stablecoin liquidity. But what does that all mean for IBC when you're kind of moving away to your own environment?
Yeah. So as part of Sei V2, like Sei V1 was only supporting Cosmosm. With Sei V2, it was difficult for us to only support EVM because there was already existing liquidity and applications on the Cosmosm side. So with Sei V2, what we needed to do was support both Cosmosm and EVM. Right? So this is something no other ecosystem has ever done before. And it greatly increases complexity from the user experience standpoint. Like a normal user that it has a Cosmos side and an EVM side is just something that people don't really understand very well. And in order to like link those accounts, that's also kind of a process that's not intuitive, like this account linking process to link your EVM side and your Cosmos side. So it was really difficult from the user experience standpoint. Like there were just a lot of user complaints around that. It was also difficult from infrastructure partner standpoint because a lot of infrastructure partners, they built systems that easily handle EVM transactions. But if there's also Cosmos transactions they need to account for, it becomes really difficult for them to modify it so that it's like working correctly to support both of them. So we realized that it's introducing a ton of friction. And after the V2 launch, basically all activity became EVM activity. And I mean, that led to SIP3, Sei Improvement Proposal 3, which was to evolve Sei into becoming EVM only. And essentially deprecating Cosmosm and in the future IBC as well. And I think that it is a difficult kind of technical decision to make, but I think it is in the long term going to be the best direction to go down because that will make it much easier from the user standpoint and the integration partner standpoint. And most activity is just not happening on the Cosmos and Cosmosm side anyway.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I guess as a cosmonaut, I'm obviously sad to hear that, but maybe in the future there's also a path for kind of reconnecting via IBC. But so far, you guys have done extremely well. Also, as we're now transitioning this conversation more towards the Sei ecosystem, all-time high in volumes, all-time high in TVL, mindshare exploding left and right. Twitter is full of Sei season, and you also have a great team that is also doing a great job and a great community. So yeah, there were a bunch of news. I think some of the most important ones in a more recent kind of time were the announcement of the Wyoming stablecoin project, which is, I think, the first state-owned or state-backed stablecoin in the US that were selecting a few projects to pilot for a stablecoin issuance on that chain, and Sei is one of them. And I think Sei also ranked the highest. They have their like scoring or something like that. Maybe you can share more around that.
Yeah, so Wyoming basically just ranked which blockchains they're most excited about. Sei was the second highest ranked blockchain. I mean, basically out of all the blockchains out there. And I think that is something that people have been extremely excited about. Just this broader like institutional adoption and like state adoption process that's happening with Sei right now. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what happens from the Wyoming side. I think this is just the ranking process. Afterwards, there still needs to be some work done before a stablecoin is actually issued in the ecosystem. But yeah, like there's a ton of stuff happening. And like, as you mentioned, I feel like the ecosystem is firing on all cylinders. Like there's a ton of really cool stuff happening from the technical side with Sei Giga. There's a ton of really good stuff happening from like TVL increasing in the ecosystem. And then there's a lot of new applications that are deploying as well. Like especially gaming applications have been getting a lot of traction. And then, yeah, there's the institutional adoption side as well. So it does really feel like we are at an inflection point right now. And I would say that as a project, Sei has basically had two inflection points. The first one was when V2 was announced. And then in like December of 23, January 24, there was a huge upsurge in activity happening in the ecosystem. I think that at that time, the ecosystem was too immature to really benefit from that activity. And by immature, I mean, there weren't all the primitives built out. There wasn't a ton of liquidity in the ecosystem. So it was really difficult to, like, developers that are coming in to really take advantage of that to build really successful projects. I think right now, this is our second time when we're at an inflection point. And this time, I think all the primitives are there. Like, all the right applications have been deployed by ecosystem partners. There's a ton of liquidity in the ecosystem. And I think now projects that come to Sei and start deploying, they have a much, much higher chance of getting that kind of generational result by building on Sei. So I'm really excited to see what happens from that standpoint in the next 6 to 12 months. I do think Sei is, like, there's something really special happening here. And it's really, really difficult to replicate that. Like, a lot of it is just based off of luck.
Especially in this market sentiment, right? For the broader kind of crypto space, like, Sei is just contrary to the general sentiment, kind of in its own season right now. And I think that is a very strong sign. Looking at all the metrics, as we mentioned, I think 570 million TVL. And also the first, I think, was it the first, at least a very serious filing for an ETF by Canary, but that is also interesting. And then as you mentioned, I think the Sei ecosystem itself, like, maybe you can highlight a few of the applications. We did a video a couple of months ago, but yeah, what in your view are some of the kind of applications to start using or to look at for the Sei community?
Yeah, I think a lot of them will be the trading focused applications and games to try playing around with. Yeah, in terms of names to mention over here, yeah, maybe I don't want to mention any specific names right now, but there are a lot of applications that are coming out that I'm really excited about that I'll let those projects themselves kind of announce it when they're ready.
Yeah, I guess we'll also work on a Sei ecosystem video where we're kind of highlighting the top most used applications and some of them that are still coming up. And we'll probably also ask your team for insights and feedback on that. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot that's cooking right now. Giga seems to be like the main thing. But besides that, what are some of the other exciting things that people might not have on their radar or kind of underestimate or underrate about Sei that's cooking right now?
Yeah, I mean, probably the thing that I've just been most impressed by is the ability of the foundation to really get distribution right now. And if you think about a blockchain, like, its customers are developers. Like, it's a multi-dimensional kind of marketplace, but the primary customers are developers. And these are the people that are actually building applications in your ecosystem. And the way for a blockchain to quote unquote win and become substantially bigger is by getting the first killer application to come and deploy in your ecosystem. In the case of Solana, right now, you could point to something like Pump.Fun that is leading to a lot of activity. And until you get that killer application, your ecosystem is just not going to be able to become massive. So it's just been really impressive to see all these new founders that are coming on to Sei. A lot of them are still pretty early, but they are deploying on mainnet. They're starting to see a ton of activity. Like, from the gaming side, there's been a huge amount of on-chain activity. And one thing that a lot of people think is, like, it might be like botted activity, but that's surprisingly, like, not the case at all. There is some amount of botted activity there, I'm sure, but a lot of it is just unique users in places like Southeast Asia and South Asia that are just actually enjoying playing these games. And that it's leading to a ton of that on-chain activity. So I think that's one of the things that's been most impressive to see, all of that coming together. Because, like, if you think about growing an ecosystem, it seems initially like it's really easy. Like, all these pre-token generation event projects, the ones that haven't launched their tokens yet, like, there's just so much hype around them, and there's all these projects that are building on them. The reality of the situation, though, is that as soon as the token is live, it's really difficult to maintain that hype, that excitement, that community. And after that token is launched, most projects just kind of, like, start fizzling out. And being able to reclaim and, like, start having that ecosystem traction again is something that very few projects are able to do. So I've just been very impressed by how the foundation has been executing there.
Yeah, I was also going to ask the final question, which is basically navigating over the past 2-3 years in crypto, right? Because you guys launched mainnet in, I think, August 23, which was a tough time in crypto, right? And when we did our interview in December 2022, that was 4 months post Terra collapse. That was when FTX went down. That, 2023, then we had USDC decoupling or from their peg or depegging. So many things that went down. macro, we went through wars, we went through so many things, but Sei seems to be coming out of this time very, very strong. So what is your kind of lessons learned as a founder, as a leader in the space?
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely been through a ton of rough times. I think that when we got started, it was also like when we were doing our seed round raise, it was right after Terra had collapsed. Our Series A was right after FTX had collapsed. Our the token launch and mainnet launch happened right when like one of the biggest Bitcoin pull downs in like the past few years. And I mean, yeah, we've just been through so much stuff afterwards. So I do think that we were kind of fortunate in a way to be built entirely in a bear market, because when you're built in a bear market, you have very scarce resources and you end up being really, really aggressive in how you prioritize things. Like if there's 10 things you can do, you pick the one thing that matters the most and you do a really good job of executing on that, just because you don't have the luxury of being able to focus on the other 9 things. Like you just don't have enough money to hire a team to do that. And you might think this is a bad thing, but it actually ends up being significantly better than the alternative, where if you end up raising too much money, it's easy to just like become really bloated and try to focus on doing too many things at once, which interestingly for startups just doesn't really work out very well. So I think we were lucky that we went through that process of building in a bear. I think that also resulted in a team that was very, like the culture that we ended up building was one that is a very startup minded culture that has resulted in us being able to just continue executing even after mainnet. So I think that's one part of it. I think the other thing, which is a surprising source of alpha, is to continue building after the mainnet launch. Like a lot of projects, they just like, after the mainnet launch happens, they kind of give up because, as I was mentioning before, there's a ton of hype leading up to mainnet. So everyone's like, yeah, I'm like doing a really, really good job. And then afterwards, that hype fizzles away. And then you're kind of left on your own. And it's like, okay, well, the project doesn't have as much traction right now. And at that point, a lot of founders, they kind of just like don't know how to make things change. And they kind of like just become really sad about it. And they, in a way, give up. And I think just continuing to push over there is probably the biggest thing that a lot of projects can do that will allow them to start seeing that traction come up again.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I also think keeping the social layer together, as you were saying, you know, establishing that culture within the foundation, within the startup, within the company, that is super important. And yeah, that also requires strong leadership and a unified vision of the founders, which is you and I guess Jeff and some of the other early members. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate that. That was a great conversation and I hope we can do this again sometime soon. Appreciate that.
Yeah, man, would love to. Thank you for having me on.